Okay. I get everyone is just like blowing my DMs up because they miss my voice. So I just thought I'd come back because I saw this breaking news headline and we'll just go ahead and get right into it. Okay, everybody. So this is a New York Times article. This news just posted within the past hour. So I'm just going to read for you. This is from the New York Times. Today is Friday, November 18th. Elizabeth Holmes is sentenced to more than 11 years for fraud. Miss Holmes was convicted in January of 4 counts of wire fraud for deceiving investors with claims about her blood testing startup Theranos. This is the first time I'm reading it as well, you guys. Okay, so there she is pregnant, showing up to court. The caption for the picture: Elizabeth Holmes with her partner Billy Evans at the federal courthouse in San Jose, California on Friday. She was convicted of 4 charges of fraud in January. Okay. Hey, this is by Aaron Griffith. Okay. San Jose, California. Elizabeth Holmes, the founder of the failed blood testing startup Theranos, was sentenced to more than 11 years in prison on Friday for defrauding investors about her company's technology and business dealings. The sentence capped a years-long saga that has captivated the public and ignited debates about Silicon Valley's culture of hype and exaggeration. Miss Holmes, who raised $945 million for Theranos and promised that the startup would revolutionize healthcare with tests that require just a few drops of blood, was convicted in January of 4 counts of wire fraud for deceiving investors with those claims, which turned out to not be true. Judge Edward J. Davila of the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of California sentenced Ms. Holmes to 135 months in prison, which is slightly more than 11 years, followed by 3 years of supervised release. Ms. Holmes, 38, who plans to appeal the verdict, must report to prison on April 27th, 2023. In the courtroom on Friday, Ms. Holmes, who appeared with a large group of friends and family, including her parents and her partner, Billy Evans, cried when she read a statement to the judge. Okay. I am devastated by my failings, she said. I have felt deep pain for what people went through because I failed them. Miss Holmes, who has a 1-year-old son and is pregnant with her second child, apologized to the investors, patients, and employees of Theranos. She said she had tried to realize her dream too quickly and do too many things at once. She ended with a quotation from the poet Rumi and a promise to do good in the world in the future. Though federal sentencing guidelines for wire fraud of the size that Miss Holmes was convicted of recommend a maximum of 20 years in prison, a probation officer assigned to the case recommended 9 years. Her lawyers had asked for just 18 months of house arrest, while prosecutors sought 15 years and $804 million in restitution for 29 investors. Ms. Holmes' case has taken on an almost mythic status among white-collar crimes. Few startup founders reach the level of prominence that she did, appearing on magazine covers, dining at the White House, and hitting a paper net worth of $4.5 billion. Since Theranos' wire fraud was exposed in 2015, Ms. Holmes' story has been told in podcasts, TV shows, books, and documentaries. Okay. And then here's this picture, Miss Holmes with her parents and Mr. Evans before her sentencing on Friday. Theranos shut down in 2018. Exaggeration and hype are common among tech startups, but very few executives are indicted on fraud charges, let alone convicted and sent to prison. That trend may be changing as the Justice Department has said it plans to be more aggressive in its pursuit of white collar criminals. In October, Trevor Milton, the founder of the electric vehicle company Nikola, was convicted of fraud. And Sam Bankman Fried, the founder of the cryptocurrency exchange FTX, which collapsed in the bankruptcy last week, is under multiple state and federal investigations. Okay, and then Elizabeth Holmes' epic rise and fall. The Theranos founder's story from $9 billion valuation to fraud conviction has come to symbolize the pitfalls of Silicon Valley's culture. And con artist with Theranos, her blood testing company, Elizabeth Holmes, fooled investors, employees, and media outlets. She then got her comeuppance. The startup playbook. Miss Holmes wasn't a creature of Silicon Valley, so the refrain went. Her trial showed otherwise. Her conviction in January 18, or rather in January, the Theranos founder was found guilty of 4 of 11 charges of fraud. On November 18th, she was sentenced to more than 11 years in prison. Her co-conspirator in July, Ramesh Balwani, a former Theranos executive who helped Holmes cultivate her Steve Jobs-like image, was found guilty of 12 counts of fraud. Prosecutors in Miss Holmes' case urged Judge Davila to consider the message her case would send to the world. In court filings ahead of the sentencing, they wrote that a long sentence for Miss Holmes was important to deter future startup fraud schemes and rebuild the trust investors must have when funding innovators. In court on Friday, Judge Davila asked if any victims of Miss Holmes were present. A man in a blue suit stood up and introduced himself as Alex Schultz, the son of George Schultz, the former Secretary of State who served on Theranos' board and who died in 2021, and the father of Tyler Schultz, a Theranos employee who helped expose the fraud. His voice shaking, Alex Schultz described how Miss Holmes and Theranos had nearly desecrated his family after she suspected Tyler Schultz of speaking to the media about Theranos. She hired private investigators to stalk them, threaten legal ruin, and took advantage of my dad, Alex Schultz said. Jeffrey Schneck, an assistant U.S. attorney and a lead prosecutor on the case, criticized Ms. Holmes' argument that Theranos' failure was typical of a high-risk, ambitious Silicon Valley startup. It is a logical fallacy to suggest that startups fail. Theranos was a startup, and therefore Theranos failed because it was a startup, he said. That is not true. Kevin Downey, a lawyer for Miss Holmes, said in court that because she had never cashed out her Theranos stock, there was no evidence of greed like yachts, planes, large mansions, and parties. We have a conviction for a crime where the defendant's motive was to build technology, he said. Asking for leniency, Ms. Holmes submitted more than 100 letters of support from figures including Stanford professors, venture capital investors, and Senator Cory Booker, Democrat of New Jersey, which painted her as a virtuous person who was a victim of circumstances. Much has been written in the media and addressed in the trial about the company and its failure. Christian Holmes, her father, wrote in one letter, "Little has been said about the innovation Elizabeth strived for, sacrificed, and accomplished in order to help the company continue." Ms. Holmes will be assigned to a prison by the Federal Bureau of Prisons based on factors such as location, space, her lack of criminal history, and the nonviolent nature of her crime. Minimum security prisons nearest to Ms. Holmes' residence in Woodside, California include the Federal Correctional Institution in Dublin. Okay, and then look, there's a black box picture. Theranos created a machine that claimed it could run more than 1,000 tests on a drop of blood. It struck partnerships with major grocery chains to build test centers in their stores. Ms. Holmes' dramatic rise and fall began more than a decade after she dropped out of Stanford University to create Theranos in 2003, a startup that aimed to revolutionize healthcare with better diagnoses of illnesses. The company created a machine that it claimed could run more than 1,000 tests on a drop of blood, and struck partnerships with major grocery chains to build test centers in their stores. Ms. Holmes also claimed the company's technology was endorsed by pharmaceutical companies and used on battlefields in Afghanistan. None of those claims turned out to be true. Theranos' deceptions were exposed by the Wall Street Journal in 2015. I wonder the name of the person who worked there who did that. And a government inspection shut down the company's lab soon after. Theranos dissolved in 2018, the year Ms. Holmes and her business partner Ramesh Balwani were indicted on fraud charges. In July, Mr. Balwani was found guilty of 12 counts of fraud in a separate trial. Ms. Holmes, who argued to separate the cases, did not cooperate with prosecutors on his case. At her trial last year, Ms. Holmes testified for 7 days, the only time she had spoken publicly about what had happened at Theranos since the company collapsed. She expressed regret for her harsh treatment of whistleblowers and journalists who investigated the company, as well as for falsifying scientific research documents. She blamed others at Theranos for many of the company's shortcomings and said that her exaggerations were simply painting a picture of the future that investors wanted to hear. They weren't interested in today or tomorrow or next month. They were interested in what kind of change we could make, she said. She also accused Mr. Balwani, whom she dated for more than a decade and whose more than 20 years older than she is, of emotional and sexual abuse. Mr. Balwani denied the accusations. Ultimately, a jury concluded that Miss Holmes was guilty of defrauding 3 of its largest investors and of conspiring to do so. After the verdict, Miss Holmes made numerous attempts to get a new trial. She was denied. Before he imposed his sentence, Judge Davila pondered Silicon Valley's ethos and what had driven Miss Holmes to commit fraud. I mean, because he's capable of this, he's an elected official, right? Was there a loss of moral compass here? Was it hubris? Was it intoxication with the fame that comes with being a young entrepreneur? He asked. He drew a distinction between investors who take big risks backing ambitious founders and those who don't know that they are being lied to. The tragedy in this case, he concluded, is that Miss Holmes is brilliant. Kali Huang contributed reporting. Okay, everybody. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thanks for like just spending time with me reading this. There's so many other articles. If anybody needs me to like read any of these articles because they can't afford the New York Times, just let me know and I'd be more than happy to read them for you guys. But I make content all the damn time. But I'll see y'all. Okay, bye.